pod nor boys, but something in between.
Buzz, buzz, motherfucker.
Welcome to the pod people. I am more powerful and athletic than you could ever imagine. Matisse Ben Rossum.
I'm 5-time tri-state arm wrestling champion Ben Sheets.
I need more donuts. I'm Cleveland Mosier.
And we're talking Cronenberg, our first ever Cronenberg on the podcast. I don't know how we've gone almost 2 years and haven't reviewed a single Cronenberg film yet.
Wait, this is your first?
This is our first
Yeah.
Cronenberg on the
Whoa.
podcast.
On the
I
podcast.
just thought y'all had done one like before I was here.
I mean,
like...
I've seen most of his films, and
Yeah.
Ben has seen all of them, but this is the first one that we've actually talked about on the show, and it's my personal favorite Cronenberg, probably. There's a couple of contenders, but I think it's one of the best.
It's definitely up there. I always bounce between this one and Videodrome.
I really like Videodrome as well, and I'm also very partial to The Brood, but those are episodes for another day. We're
Yes.
talking about The Fly. Now, we've probably mentioned The Fly on the podcast a couple times. I think we mentioned it in our episode on The Thing last year for our podiversary, but this is one of the very few exceptions of a remake being wildly better than the original.
Yes. We abstained from doing an original remake, in fact, because I don't know.
I didn't
if
have much interest, honestly.
Yeah. Maybe
I-
we'll get around to it eventually, but this one has so much to talk about that we don't really need to.
Yeah, it's based on a film from the 50s, I believe, also called The Fly. I'm not sure who made that film. Is Cleveland, do you know? That seems in your wheelhouse.
I believe it stars Vincent Price.
It stars Vincent Price, yeah.
Price.
But who directed it, I do not know.
It's also, I think, based on a book or a short story. In that way, it's very similar to The Thing. Book turned into 40s, 50s era film, turned into 80s era film. All we're waiting for is the inevitable Fly reboot sometime in the next few years.
Terrible CG
Yeah.
that serves no purpose.
But as far as I know, in the original, it just ends up being a man with a fly's head and also a fly with a man's head.
Help me! Help me! Help me!
That's not the case in this one, not with Master of Body Horror David Cronenberg.
Yeah,
No.
No. He is not a fly, nor is he a man. He is something much worse than both.
Yeah.
This film stars Jeff Goldblum, probably the earliest role of Jeff Goldblum that I can think of having seen.
Really,
got a pretty
it's a breakout performance.
Oh, it's a master
I mean, yeah,
performance
he's
for sure.
incredible in this movie.
I think Gina Davis does an incredible job too as
She
the
is,
journalist, girlfriend kind of character.
I love this movie because it's really a very small cast. It's essentially just the three main characters. Mostly just Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis, and then the other guy who plays the jealous ex-boyfriend, who's also like the editor at, what is it, Particle magazine?
Yeah.
He has a license plate that says Particle.
It says
'cause
Particle.
He's that kind of guy.
So in a lot of ways, this film is a character study of Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis and their relationship and sort of the sci-fi horror concept that comes between them. Jeff Goldblum plays Seth Brundle, who is a physicist who has developed teleportation pods, essentially because he hates traveling. He hates driving, makes him car sick, and he hates planes and trains, so why do any of that when you can just teleport yourself instantly from one place to another? Gets a little bit full of himself, and rashly decides to do human testing while he's drunk on himself, and what he does not realize is that in his telepod with him there is a tiny little innocuous housefly that in the process of teleportation gets spliced with his own DNA, and the whole film is kind of about his devolution into monstrosity
As they are fused together.
as they're fused together into Brundle Fly.
It's truly a simple story, but I think it works so well because of that. it's really kind of a unique premise in horror in that it's not an unknown monstrosity. You
Right.
know what's coming and what's happening. Instead, it kind of piles on that dread of seeing this devolution.
Right. As soon as Gina Davis notices like the coarse insect hairs growing out of his back, like you can kind of get a good impression of what is happening to him, but at least on your first view, you really don't know the depths that it's going to go.
Yeah.
And man, does it go down some fucking depths.
Oh yeah, it's plundering.
It's plundering, yeah. I mean, Cronenberg is so good at body horror, and I think this may be his finest example of it in all of his films. Videodrome has some really great stuff too, but like, holy shit, the transformation of Jeff Goldblum into Brundlefly is so gross.
Horrifying.
Very tactile, like you can just feel how like slimy he is.
I've considered it like the hallmark for practical effects. You know, like the standard for
The Fly and
feeling
the
something,
Thing
yeah.
are pretty
For
much
practical
my golden standards for
Yeah.
like monster effects.
Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
say The Fly, The Thing, Hellraiser, like those
Yeah.
films, they're just, to me, will always be superior. Like to have it on film, on screen,
100%.
You can reach out and touch it. It is very real. Even when there's like you can see a bit of the puppetry or like the stability of like certain like props. I'll still take it over CG any day.
Yeah, I mean it's a somewhat of a tired argument, but
course,
like
yeah.
if it's in a room and you can touch it and you can see that the actors are reacting to something that they can physically see rather than having to imagine what they're reacting to digitally, like even that, it just makes for such better performances,
Especially
too.
when it's done well.
Oh yeah,
That's the big thing. You know, when
100%.
practical
Yes.
effects are done poorly, like, it's just a rubber suit.
True.
But, like, the thing is, like, for example, in The Fly, that's purely a gold standard
Now-
because, you know, you get such goopy, slimy, tactile effects that feel horrifying because they're so real.
In this case, yeah, very true. I would argue that I would take bad practical effects over bad CG any day, just because there's something about bad practical effects that I find charming.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily indicative of a good film, but like if I'm watching a dumb bad monster movie and the effects look goofy and like you can see that the suit is made of rubber or whatever and it's like bending weird, it's all like, oh, that's kind of cute. Whereas like the Scorpion King
Good example.
in The Mummy too, that is not charming. That is just very bad to look at.
Oh yeah, God, those effects. I'd say they haven't aged well, but I don't think they were great
They
when
were
they
never
came
good.
out.
They were never good.
Yeah. No, there's a truth to that. And I think to a certain degree it has to do with the artificiality of
Yeah.
CG as well. And so it
Totally.
feels like cheap plastic as opposed to
Actual cheap plastic.
Yeah, which I prefer, or cheap rubber, you know, at
Right.
least. Like, and you know, if there's a guy piloting it, there's a making aspect of it that you can still enjoy. Even if it feels false, like you can tell it's a guy in a suit, it's fun, there's a person in there, there's a narrative. But if it's cheap CG, you know, what's the story? Like there's nothing I can really
Right.
grab there.
I agree. Not the case in this movie at all. Like Ben was saying, it is truly the epitome of practical effects, I think, in so many ways. What I love about the story that I think differentiates it from other kinds of movies where a person becomes quote unquote infected with something and they turn from human to monster is that in this film, like, because Jeff Goldblum is sort of like a shut-in scientist character, he's not afraid of his transformation.
Yeah.
If anything, he revels in it.
Yeah, there's a beautiful arc with his approach to his situation, or his mentality of his situation.
Yeah.
At the beginning, he sees, before he realizes that he's been merged with a fly, he thinks that being transported made him a superior being.
That it in deconstructing and reconstructing him, that it somehow like purified him genetically and essentially turned him into like a superhuman. I love that.
The word purification is so good too.
Right,
like,
and we get a lot of stuff with that, with him like just doing this insane acrobatic nonsense in his sort of like warehouse apartment / lab. We see, as he develops a relationship with Gina Davis, that like after he's become fused with the Fly, that his sex drive is sort of insatiable. Like they're having sex for like hours, and like he's just not getting tired. We see them going out, and him going out and arm wrestling that dude in the bar,
which
snapping the bone out.
One of the most iconic
so
scenes in the movie, in my opinion.
I love
it's
that
one
scene,
of the scenes where, when I first saw this movie back in middle school or high school, like it stuck with me.
It's great. I love how that is like the first side effect of the teleportation, that it's not just immediately him turning into a monster, that there's a good aspect of it. It's like, oh, he's enhanced himself and made himself something, better than human. And then there all of a sudden starts to be like a very, very dramatic decline.
Yeah, and there is that beautifully short window where he recognizes that he is becoming something horrifying. But even then, he can barely get it out.
Well,
to
he
Gina
thinks
Davis's character before.
At first he thinks he's dying. Yeah. Because he starts having like cancerous growths,
and his fingernails are falling off,
and he thinks that he's diseased. And then he runs the numbers in his teleportation machine and looks at the records and sees that there are more than one genetic blueprint in the teleportation pod. And then once he realizes that he's not just dying, but that he's like his DNA has been fused with an insect, then it just becomes like something fresh and new to like study and get excited by. Yeah. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when he's in the bathroom and he's like transformation, and like his teeth start falling out.
Ooh, yeah.
And
yeah.
he like
and
he opens the medicine cabinet, and he's been like collecting all of the parts of his body that have like fallen off as like vestigial structures. He's got like an ear in a petri dish, and he like adds his teeth to it, and he's talking about is like, oh yeah, I don't need these things anymore. I'm becoming something more powerful. That scene is great.
And when you hear like Jeff Goldblum's voice coming out of this creature, you'd think that it wouldn't work. Jeff Goldblum has such a specific personality type and like meter of speech.
He's so goofy and charismatic, and
he's one of the best at like that delightfully awkward sort of character. Like it's why he plays scientists so well, is he has this endearing quality. And when you hear that endearing voice coming out of like such a hideous beast,
but also nerdy.
Yeah.
He does that really well.
Well, he has such an affectation when he starts transforming that it becomes less Goldblum over time.
Yeah.
And more other, which I really appreciate, because it feels like he's transforming in his performance just as much as the body is.
I think so. Like
it's
I would say he definitely become, even before he's completed his transformation, he's unrecognizably Jeff Goldblum at a certain point, even in his performance, and like you said, his speech and his affectation, which is really credit to him as an actor, that he can so well hide himself in the character, and and can hide his original character too. I mean, granted, the heavy prosthetics help that a lot. When it doesn't look like Jeff Goldblum, it's way easier to make yourself forget that it is Jeff Goldblum.
And he does a great job of like sort of distorting his voice. Also, like towards the end.
Yeah, after his teeth fall out, he gets like a lispier kind of affectation.
I'm sure of that. Part of that is also having prosthetics in his mouth while he's trying to talk.
Exactly.
makes it harder for just about anybody.
For sure. Regardless, it's effective. Let's see. Another, while we're talking about how great the practical effects are, I do also want to mention how cool the pods look. I love the pods.
Yeah, the pods are dope. Great.
Yeah, I mean, we're the pod people. We love pods.
Gotta talk about the pods. You can't not talk about the pods.
That's crazy.
Very on brand.
They're like, I love the design. They're like sort of ribbed eggs.
Yeah.
They're like almost Giger-esque. Like they're not quite organic looking enough to be like Giger, but it gives me.
I'd say Giger-esque.
It gives me a little bit of the vibe. Sure. I love that apartment set of his that he had, that is just like he lives and works in the same space. Like his apartment is his lab.
Dude, jealous. I was jealous as hell.
He's sleeping on a pull-out couch, but he has like a kitchen and everything.
Yeah, it's a fucking rad studio apartment.
It's literally in a warehouse. Like like when he's first taking Gina Davis back to his apartment at the very, very beginning, because he meets her at a science conference, and she's a journalist, and it's like kind of weird that he's taking her back to this like warehouse in like the middle of the night. It's like, ooh, what's going on here?
Did they say like where it is? It's in New York, but like, is it in like it looks like a Brooklyn like warehouse.
Is it in New York?
Yeah, I thought it was in Chicago.
Oh, is it in Chicago?
Well, Cronenberg is a Canadian filmmaker, so I know he's made a lot of his films. He shot a lot of his films in Canada. The point is, I don't think
it's cheaper too.
I don't think they ever explicitly state the location.
It reminded me of a lot of like city. Warehouses I've been to in Brooklyn.
It is a city. Yeah, you spent a lot of time in warehouses in Brooklyn.
I mean, I have, yes. But that's a story for another time. It's really cool for it. I love. God, I wish I could live there. It's. That's my ideal, like honestly, pull out couch and all, like it's great. Just being able to work on my project like all day, in a big space.
You basically have that already.
Yeah, it's true.
You live in a studio apartment where you also work.
True
so.
that. You just want a warehouse.
I just want
bigger. Yeah, I just want more.
Yeah, that's fair. I love too, because like once he's starting to become Brundlefly, and he realizes that he can crawl on the wall and the ceiling like a fly. There are a couple of scenes where he is like crawling on the ceiling, and like it's obviously just They built that set and rotated it, or they built it upside down so he can crawl on it.
Yeah.
Because like that's not a digital or effect or anything. Like it is it's a practical effect, and it's so good too.
It looks great.
And also just like I just kept being blown away by like the complexity, because it is a warehouse. You've got like all these beams and pipes, and you've got like the skylights and stuff like that, and to like construct that kind of set just for like 2 or 3 long shots where like Jeff Goldblum is like crawling around on it, like just going the extra mile. I have so much appreciation for that.
It's crazy. Like
attention to detail.
I'm such a sucker for like analyzing those sorts of effects, and I didn't even think about it. Like I didn't even think about like how they were setting up that sequence. Like
it's very immersive. I didn't
think about them rotating it. It never.
Well, it's just so well executed.
Right.
Like it definitely doesn't look like wire work, and if it is, it's extremely.
It's not.
Well done,
it's not wire work. Like it's either a set that they've built that they could rotate, or they built a set upside down.
Yeah.
As the ceiling.
Incredible.
Either way, like it's such a well done effect. And I mean, he's a fly man, so of course he's crawling around on the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
I will say one of the things we never get in his transformation that I kind of wish we did is he never grows wings. I always thought that would be cool if the fly man had wings. Even if they don't work.
My concern would be
even if he doesn't. I'm not saying I want to watch him flying around.
Yeah, just like shitty wings coming out of his back.
But I want him to grow. I want him to grow some
I wouldn't
wings.
be surprised if in The Fly 2...
Oh yeah, if it's a CG
There's
one,
some wings in there.
No, for sure, it'll be buzzing around and.
Oh no, I mean there was an actual Fly sequel.
Oh, that Fly sequel. I thought you meant the
yeah.
inevitable reboot,
oh,
like we were
well,
talking about earlier.
That too. I'm kind of glad they didn't have wings, because I feel like it could easily be over the top.
I think it would have been cool.
I wouldn't be surprised if they tried wings and cut them. Like I'm literally took them out. Like my concern, is like it It would have felt too much like a
too
butterfly,
fly and not enough Brundle.
I think it would have been. I think it would have been cool.
All I needed was the sequence with his face melting off.
Which is great.
That's one of my favorite horror shots of all time. Like it's
same.
It might be the most jarring thing I've seen.
When the fly face comes out from
beneath his face.
His face.
Yeah, his face just splits in half.
I'm legitimately scary.
Wretched and terrifying.
I'm also very partial to the part right before that when he regurgitates onto what is that character's name? Stathis, the boyfriend. It's a great scene when he reveals that like he can't eat normally anymore. He can't eat solid food. And we've seen him like since the teleportation. He's like eating just insane amounts of sugary food. Like he's putting like 10 spoons of sugar into his coffee. He's always munching on like donuts or candy and stuff like that. Great little foreshadowing of him becoming a fly.
Well, and the regurgitation, it's just so visceral and gross.
Ooh, yeah, it is. I love that, like, Geena Davis's character comes over and he's like, oh, you want to see something? This is really cool. And she's like, no, not really. Yeah. And he's like, I can't eat solid food anymore. I tried and it made me sick. So now, like a fly, I have to regurgitate on my food. He just has, like, a pile of donuts. He just, like, throws up onto it and just, like, dissolves them. It's like, oh, it's so gross. Like, it's gross enough that flies do that, but like a person throwing up acid onto their food so they can slurp up the liquefied goo.
The most terrifying part is how he's not appalled by it.
Right.
Like his lack of fear.
He's that's what I love so much about the character is like I said earlier, he's reveling in his transformation. He's so fascinated by the implications of what's happening to him and the chance to study and learn from it that he completely overlooks the fact of like how horrifying and monstrous it is.
Well, going off of that, like Cronenberg has such a fascination with the sciences in his films. This movie kind of plays into a theme he uses over his career about, science often focuses on what you can do rather than what you should do.
Very much so,
and this is kind of expressing like the dangers of exploring what can be done without regards of what the consequences for that can be.
And from like a psychological or world building perspective, it makes sense too, because as he's becoming more insectile, he's losing his sense of empathy. And so his fear is getting shut off because he's becoming an insect.
He even mentions something about that at some point about how brutal the insect life is and how we never think about it because it's so much smaller than we are, but how insects are incapable of empathy. And that it's just about, like, survival.
The dialogue is so good in that sequence, too, when he tries to warn Geena Davis because of that. Like, he goes in such an offhand way, because he's starting to kind of lose his mind at that point, so he's trying to get this point across to her. It's like, I'm becoming a sociopath. You need to get away from me.
Yeah, it's like the last of his subconscious, like, trying to tell her to, like, run away and not come back.
But then he has to make it, like, a scientific
but even thing. So, like, it's something that, like, it's just, like, a fun fact, but it's like you get the impression that like there is Seth Brundle in there somewhere being like, get away, like this is only going to get worse.
Well, that's the thing I love too, because while he really goes whole into the transformation by the end of it, there is still Brundle within there, that's the scariest part.
Yeah. He realizes that he's sort of like trapped in himself inside of this sort of monstrous prison, and that wins over in the very end. The revelation too that like Geena Davis is pregnant. Nobody really knows like what that baby is gonna be like because it obviously has some human fly DNA. I love her nightmare where she gives birth to a maggot.
Yeah. Normally not one for dream sequences, but man,
Cronenberg has such a sexual fascination as well.
Oh my god, that's maybe the most Cronenberg scene in the entire movie. I love how it's also like a dream sequence where it's like a true subversion of it being a dream sequence, because she realizes she's pregnant before that, and then she realizes what like Seth is becoming, and she's talking about like I gotta get an abortion. I don't want to have whatever this thing is inside me. I don't want to give birth to this. And then it like cuts to like her later giving birth, and then it is just like a maggot, and then she wakes up from it, and it's like you think that that's actually what is happening. It's not like an obvious dream sequence, which I really like, because so often dream sequences are like the most
obnoxious
cop out.
I mean, in a traditional dream sequence, they just don't have stakes often.
Right.
But this
that
one
frames it really well.
Yeah, this
like
one, it feels like there's stakes, because you think, oh yeah, she's just getting an abortion.
Right.
You know, it feels like it could be real.
Right, yeah, they imply that she's not even giving birth, that she's going to get the abortion, and then something is going wrong, and then you see the doctor, who, fun little cameo by David Cronenberg, just like pulls out this writhing maggot infant thing. It's like, no, fuck this, and then she wakes up, and then like after having that nightmare, it's like, that's really an excellent way of putting us into her shoes and like giving us a way to empathize with what she's feeling. It's like, oh yeah, you definitely don't want to have that baby.
No.
Because it probably is just going to be a maggot or something.
That's, I think, the most horrifying thing about that dream sequence is that it could still be the case.
Yeah.
We never learn whether that is what it is or not. And that,
what I love too is to circle back around to like the brutality of insects and the nature of creatures like that, is that they are really driven by two primary instincts, and that is to feed and to reproduce. Like there's not much more than that. And we get a great representation of that in Jeff Goldblum, because after that dream sequence, like, he very much becomes obsessed with her not getting the abortion. Like, he has to ensure the procreation of that child. It turns into something else with him wanting to fuse the three of them together. Like, that's his ultimate plan, to minimize the amount of fly DNA to try to make a more perfect being. But still, like, the sort of like fierceness with which he's determined to protect his offspring is very insectile as well.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
It makes for a really powerful shift of motive. It's the perfect amount of pacing to keep the plot motivated towards him still being an immediate threat. God, I love that. And do you want to talk about the social aspects of this film? And like
sure, go for it.
That was a big point I wanted to bring up, is that this film doesn't just visually make you feel uncomfortable. It does a fan-fucking-tastic job of making you feel socially uncomfortable as well. The whole relationship between Gina Davis and her ex-lover, the editor of Stathis, is wretched. I hated all of it.
Ooh, yeah, he's real scuzzy.
Well, not just him, but her too. Like, I hated the way she treated that situation, and in all the right ways. It's fantastic. Like, her character is not just played up as like the ideal heroine. The film is extremely aware of building up her flaws. And when they were first introduced in the film, I was actually kind of pissed off at the movie, because I was like, oh man, that's like really fucking sexist for her to like not just like want to deal with her abuser and whatnot. I'm like, no, it makes her a very powerfully flawed character. And oh god, it made me feel so scuzzy when like she kind of goes along with it and like lets him keep her key to her apartment. Doesn't just tell him to fuck right off like all the time.
Well, I mean, another thing,
because he just keeps being skeezy at her, and she keeps like tolerating it.
He's also her employer.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Well.
He's her boss.
She might not necessarily be happy with it, but she chooses that it's not worth it to fight that because he's the editor of the magazine that she works for.
Right, so she's trapped.
She's stuck in the situation, which is kind of a motif throughout the movie.
I like that we get the context of her meeting him as a student, like he was a professor of one of the classes she took in college, and then he offered her the position at Particle, so that like
even when they started dating, it was like
the power dynamic was always
that power dynamic was always there. He went from being her professor to being her boss.
Yeah, like so awful, just wretched.
But also at the same time that she was willing to exploit that as well, you know, for the furtherment of her own position. I think that all of the characters in this movie are extremely selfish.
Yes.
I love how, like, realistically flawed they all are. They all have their own vices. There's nobody who is, like, a true heroic character. Yeah. You know, Jeff Goldblum is good until he's not, you know? Yeah. And, like, Geena Davis is flawed, but ultimately I think she ends up being...
she's still our heroine.
She ends up being the goodest of them all. And even by the end, you know...
I would suppose that she is a good person. If anything, her greatest flaw is, like, that she doesn't stand up for herself, and she allows herself to be abused.
Yeah.
You know, by both of the men, you know, in this situation. And I love it because it plays up her personality... and it justifies why she keeps going back to Jeff Goldblum as he transforms, because that in of itself is a very different type of an abusive situation. Well, Jeff Goldblum is still a good person, but he's becoming a monster.
What I like
about
it...
she tolerates him becoming a monster for so long because she's used to dating monsters. It's what she knows, and it's subtly done.
What I love about her relationship to both of them is that her tolerance of the abuse is not fear-driven in either extent, I think. Like, fear is an aspect of it, but I don't think it's driven by that. Like, she keeps going back to Jeff Goldblum even as he's becoming a monster.
Largely out of sympathy.
Because out of sympathy, because she loves him, and because she wants to help him. You also very much get the impression that she tolerates Stathis's abuse, not because she's afraid of him, but she's kind of apathetic towards him.
Yeah.
She doesn't really, she doesn't consider it worth it to fight back against his scuzziness, but it also doesn't seem to, really bother her that much. It's just sort of whatever, you know, it's not worth dealing with. She never seems to be a victim. At no point in this movie do I feel like Geena Davis is portrayed as a victim, which I like. Like, she always seems to be very much...
She at least, she is in a situation where she is, when she's being attacked by the fly, but even then she doesn't approach the situation as one.
Sure. Yeah. You could technically apply the definition of victim to her.
Sure.
But she's not a helpless character.
No.
It's not like she's torn between a literal monster and a metaphorical monster, and that, I just don't know what to do, I can't get out of it. It's like... she's very self-determined, and she puts up with these things because she needs to.
Yeah.
Or she perceives that she needs to.
Yeah, this isn't fucking Beauty and the Beast.
Right.
No, thank God.
She's never a damsel in distress. She kind of is when Jeff Goldblum captures her. And
mechanically she is, but she doesn't approach the situation that way.
Right.
Yeah, which is just ideal for this type of film. I think it takes a certain progressive mentality to be able to identify those sorts of things. Because, again, when the scene was happening, I was like, fuck, it's your standard fare, 80s bullshit. Here we go again. And before the film was even done, I was recognizing, no, it's the theme, and it's played up very, very well. All the better for the movie to make me think that during it. Because it made me feel so much more wretched.
Right. I love how, Stathis goes to rescue her, but she ends up really rescuing herself because, Stathis gets...
'Twas beauty killed the beast.
Right. Well, Stathis gets regurgitated on, and it melts his hand and his
horrifying
foot off, which is really gross. Because at first, it almost seems like Seth does it instinctually like onto Stathis's hand because he's like holding the shotgun and it melts, and then he like sees that, and then there's kind of like you can see that inquisitiveness, like, oh shit, I can do this. And like when Stathis falls over, he sort of like leans over his leg, and there's sort of like a mischievousness about him like regurgitating onto his leg and melting off his foot that I find really horrifying.
Yeah.
Like he seems like Seth seems to revel in that moment a little bit.
You never
like,
want the monster smiling. That's always scary.
He didn't quite realize that he was capable of that, and then, oh look, I've discovered a new toy, you know?
Yeah, because like your mental approach to that sequence is, you know, in so many films of the same genre and era, like when the bad guy goes to get killed, you're thinking, oh yeah, cool, I get to see a kill sequence where I don't feel bad about it. And like, this guy's such a scumbag. Like, you hate him the whole movie. But during that scene, no one deserves that.
Like, he sucks.
No one deserves to have their limbs melted off by acid.
Exactly.
He sucks, but he's not irredeemable, because when he saw this mutated beast man kidnapping Gina Davis, like, if he was really an irredeemable character, he would have just been like, fuck it, not my problem, and we would have never seen him.
To a degree,
that's the thing too,
because like he does like encourage her to keep going back to him well after he knows what kind of a monster it is. Like he's a fucking miserable piece of shit.
He's not a good guy, but he does have a certain degree of redemption because he does go to help her.
Yeah.
When he doesn't have to. At that point, like I said, if he was a total shitheel, he'd be like, oh shit, this got way more out of hand than I was anticipating. This is something that I'm not looking for. Like, I'm the fuck out of here.
I find redemption an interesting word, because I would wonder, like, if he had showed up and saved her, I don't know if that would have been, like, enough of an act to redeem.
That would have been gross, I think.
It would have been awful.
If he had turned into, like, the knight in shining armor, if she had been the damsel in distress, I would not have liked it. But it is to his credit that he does go back for her.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say.
He doesn't save her. Mm-hmm. He ends up being maimed because of her, not because of her. He ends up being maimed because of his decision to go back and help her, but he's not, like, even by the end, you know, like, the lines are kind of blurred. He's not a good character, but you do still kind of have some sympathy for him in that situation.
Oh, you definitely have sympathy for him. I guess my only bit is, like, if he had saved her, which of course would have been bad. We all agreed that would have been bad. But if he had, I just still don't think that would have been enough to redeem him in any way.
No. But my point is that the fact that you do feel sympathy for him in that scene is a credit to him having a kind of redemption, because if he was a truly evil villainous character, you as the viewer would relish his destruction. Because think of how many other films where there is the scuzzy evil villain character who gets destroyed by the monster that he has helped create or whatever, and you're like, yeah, fuck you, buddy. Mm-hmm. You're finally getting your just desserts, you piece of shit.
Exactly.
But then in this movie, that's not the case at all. It's like, oh no, like, you feel bad for him still.
It's really a testament to the writing in this movie, because it's a super complex character where he's definitely more skeevy than evil, totally. You know?
Yeah.
He still has evil tendencies, but he's not, oh, this evil guy, you know?
He's reprehensible, but he's not a cartoon character.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that somewhat extends to all of the characters. All of the three main characters have their bad qualities, but you can still connect with them on an emotional level, every single one of them. And that's a testament to good writing and good character development.
Oh, yeah.
It might be a little bit of a corny mechanic, but I do love how at the end, when she escapes from her pod at the last second before the teleportation is initiated, the Brundle fly sort of like crawls half out of his pod, and then the teleportation happens, and he fuses with the pod.
Oh, I absolutely love that.
I love that. That's not what I'm saying, that it's a little bit corny. It's the after that, when it's like, that is his downfall. He has become a third man, a third machine, a third pod. where he
Tetsuo, the Brundle fly.
Tetsuo the Brundle
man. Tetsuo the Brundle man.
When the monster reveals the last bit of his humanity with his claw grabbing the barrel of the shotgun and putting it to his head to be put down Old Yeller style by Gina Davis.
Well, the reason it's effective is because
it's a corny mechanic.
It's very believable.
But in that case, it's very believable in the fact that you've spent so much time with all of these characters and you're seeing this culmination of all of them together, this being the ending of the love story between Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis, is him as unrecognizably human, begging to be put out of his misery.
Well, yeah, and on top of that,
it's impactful.
Considering he's like a third just metal chunk at this point.
He's gonna die.
More than even Brundlefly, he probably felt like he was dying because a third of him is literally dead.
He realistically probably wouldn't have survived that. It's asking for the mercy killing, and the fact that his lover has to be the one to do it, and that she, even though she's not happy about it, that she does still do it. Is I think a very satisfying conclusion.
Very much so.
I love how to just sort of like generally address the entire structure of the film.
Yeah, put a bow on it.
That there is no fat at all in this movie. It is such a lean story in the sense that it starts at that party for Particle, and Jeff Goldblum immediately meets Gina Davis in the first 2 minutes of the film and takes her back to the apartment to show his experiment. And then
they do a great job setting up the danger of the pod quickly.
Right.
When they get the monkeys.
Oh, yeah, that's another great scene.
We didn't talk about the monkeys, yeah.
No, we didn't. When they first try to transport organic material and he has a baboon.
It's probably like the only bit of kind of weird world building when Jeff just keeps showing up with monkeys.
With baboons.
Full size.
Yeah, where does he get these?
It's like the scientific community.
The market's flooded.
You start with we were making that joke.
The market's flooded with baboons.
They can't sell them quick enough.
Can't get rid of them.
They're giving them away.
But
no mice needed. We got baboons.
We can come back to that, but my point is that it starts with the party immediately getting us into the story, and then immediately after she shoots Brundlefly in the head and he dies, roll credits.
Yep.
There's no fat whatsoever.
Fly's dead. Movie's done.
The film never once strays from its core story.
Yeah,
it is continuous, beginning to end, no fat whatsoever. There's not a scene that I would cut in this movie. I think it's the absolute perfect use of time for the
Absolutely.
film.
And I think even scenes like the monkey scene where we get them trying to teleport this baboon and it comes through
that's great.
Just inside out, kind of does a perfect job setting the stakes in a lot of ways, Well, for what's to come.
It sets up the danger of the body horror immediately. But even I love the problem solving in trying to figure out how do we properly transport organic material? We have to figure out how to convince the computer to reconstruct the particles perfectly. I love the bit where he puts the steak in there, or he cuts a steak in half and puts half of it in the teleportation machine, transports it, cooks both, has Gina Davis taste them, and she's like, okay, this is a regular steak. Ooh, this one doesn't taste right. There's something synthetic about it. That is a really great scene. I also really love how the whole impetus for him deciding to teleport himself is almost like a comedy of errors, in the sense that he wants to celebrate that he's figured out how to transport organic material. He's like, let's get Chinese food and let's get drunk and we'll have a good time. And Gina Davis is like, you know what, no, I'll be back in a few hours, I have to deal with something, because she wants to go, like, permanently end things with Stathis.
Well, because
and, like,
she sent the magazine with Jeff Goldblum's face on the cover.
Right. It's like blackmail.
She wants to go deal with that and be like, because that's at the point where she realizes, like, she's in love with Seth, and the only way that they can, you know, be good moving forward is that she has to end things with Stathis. She has to really, like, decisively end things with Stathis. And she goes off to do that, and Jeff Goldblum thinks that because she's doing that she's out, like, cheating on him or something. He gets jealous, and he gets drunk. And then he's like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll just teleport we'll just move right to human trials. Who gives a shit? You know? And then that's the whole inciting incident for the entire thing. It's like, nah, man, if you just trusted your girlfriend and let her, like, do her thing and come back, then none of this would have happened. It makes the whole thing really, really more tragic. Because as a character, as a scientist, he knows better. And it's when he lets his emotions get in the way, when for the one moment in the film that he stops being rational and he stops being scientific and lets his emotion take over, that's like the beginning of his downfall, like the key turning point. It's great. Love it. So well written.
I would hate to let this episode end without mentioning the fucking phenomenal soundtrack by Howard Shore.
Yes,
my boy Howard Shore. The score is awesome.
I was extremely surprised when the opening credits rolled and it said soundtrack by Howard Shore. I'm a huge Howard Shore fan. And, I mean, who isn't, right? And like,
right? No, I am too.
I was just not expecting, like, him to do a film like this, and it is such a cool pick. Because it's all orchestrally worked up, and there's a couple of sequences where they play up, like, the repeating string rhythms that kind of, like, oscillate in and out, and they feel like a fly almost buzzing, but it's subtle, it's not overblown. Mm-hmm. Oh, fuck. I loved it.
You know Howard Shore did the score for Silence of the Lambs as well.
Mm-hmm.
He is...
Man's a pro.
And I mean, this was well before Silence of the Lambs, but, like, he's not... He's not unfamiliar to the horror genre. Most people will probably always know him as the composer for the Lord of the Rings films, and probably my first real exposure to Howard Shore, and probably still my favorite score of his, because, like, how can you not love the Lord of the Rings score? But, like, dude is an incredible composer, and thank you for mentioning that, because
of course.
Honestly, I was just gonna put that as an addendum in my rating. But I'm glad we talked about it for a little bit. I think it's excellent.
Well, since we're pretty much wrapping up, why don't you start?
Okay, sure, yeah. So Cronenberg is definitely one of my favorite directors. I think body horror is usually one of the scariest types of horror, in my opinion.
Totally.
I think the practicals are so excellent in this movie. Like you said, Tease, this movie is structurally just so tight. I love the kind of anti-technocratic message in this, of the dangers of science and technology gone too far. The music is just excellent. All of the acting is excellent. This is honestly the gold standard for horror movies, and it's one of my all-time favorite horror movies. I'm glad we're finally covering it. It's a 5 out of 5. It's an obvious 5 out of 5.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add with that. It is truly the gold standard. I couldn't say exactly what place it occupies, but it's easily within my top 10 horror films of all time. It's probably my favorite Cronenberg film, which is saying something considering how fucking stacked his filmography is. It's really a perfect film from every standpoint, from writing, performances, cinematography, practical effects, just legendary, soundtrack, and score. It's going to be a perfect 5 out of 5 for me as well. No hesitation there.
Yeah. Same. Go ahead and mark it down. It's 5 out of 5. I just can't get that shot out of my head when it's like tracking down his body after he leaves the pod, and we just get that beautiful, like, wretched, like, biopunk, cables and stuff infused in his flesh. And again, like, the sequence where his face splits is, just one of the most horrifying things I have and will likely ever see in horror. It's a 5 out of 5. It's a 10 out of 10. It's a good movie. It's
a goddamn good film.
Yeah.
And it joins the hallowed halls of the Golden Pods with a perfect, unanimous 5 out of 5 rating. If for some reason you're a horror fan and you have not seen The Fly, what are you doing?
Why are you listening to these fucking dweebs?
Yeah, why are you listening to us? Go watch The fucking Fly. Jesus Christ.
What the fuck are you doing?
I can't say more than that. It's a fucking perfect film. Cronenberg is king, and this is the first Cronenberg that we're talking about, but there's no way that it'll be the last.
No, absolutely not.
So that'll wrap that up. Now, before we close the episode, it is time, the moment we've all been waiting for. We have the results of the Rotten Tomatoes score and opening weekend box office of Child's Play, which will determine the mid-year winner of our prediction contest and who will decide the 3 films that we talk about for our mid-year catch-up next week.
When you started setting that up as the moment we've all been waiting for, et cetera, I thought you were talking about the sponsorship, and you made me very afraid. That's a lot of pressure. I'm also going to say that this episode is sponsored by Ben. Here you go, Ben.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Perfect. So, yeah, we're about midway through, about halfway through our predictions. I think this one's just over half, considering there's a couple movies that have been pushed back. Just to recap, Cleveland, you had 4 points. Yes. And Tease and I both had 5. So it's neck and neck.
Any man's game.
So first, I'll start with the box office opening weekend.
Okay, what were our predictions first?
For Child's Play, the opening weekend predictions, Matisse, you had 25 million.
Okay.
Cleve, you had 11 million. And I had 29 million. The opening box office results were 14 million.
Cleve!
Oh, shit!
So we're in a three-way tie.
Oh my god!
5. And there's 1 point left to be distributed.
Oh my god, guys!
I have something shocking right now. Okay, so we were originally planning on doing this episode last week. And I had pulled the Rotten Tomatoes number from last week.
Okay.
So just to recap, Tease, you guessed 55.
Oh, jeez.
Cleve, you guessed 40, and I guessed 63.
I'm actually in the race now. I'm
So when I compiled the scores last week, it was 60.
Oh, shit.
Which puts me winning it by 1. However, I checked the Rotten Tomatoes score.
That was before the end of opening weekend.
Yes.
Okay.
I checked the Rotten Tomatoes score an hour ago, and it's gone down to 59. We have a tie.
Whoa,
we have a tie. 6-5 right there.
Oh my god.
So, because of that, I'm going to give you guys the option here. Okay. We can either each pick one movie and then agree on a third, or we can just do 2 movies next week.
How about this? I have an alternative. Since it was so close, why don't each of the 3 of us choose a film?
Okay. I'm into that.
Sure.
Really into that.
Why don't we do that? Because that was a really close race, and even with a split tie between the 2 of us, Cleve is just 1 point behind. So I'm okay with let's each of the 3 of us choose a film, and that way it can be truly catered across the 3 of us. We will not reveal those now because we obviously need to pick our films. Next week's episode will be a surprise, but it will be our official 2019 mid-year horror catch-up episode. And we will be reviewing 3 horror films from this year that we have not seen or talked about yet. So the hype is real. Get ready and tune in next week for that. And I'll just wrap us up by saying, if you like the show, leave us a 5-star rating and a friendly review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod if you so choose. Check us out on Letterboxd if you have a Letterboxd account at /PodPeoplePod for the list of all the films we've talked about on the show, our average ratings and links to those episodes. And if you don't have a Letterboxd account and you're a film lover, I would recommend it. It's a great way to track your films. I've been tracking every single film I've watched since 2013. So it's a really fun thing to do, so I would recommend it. We are not sponsored by Letterboxd.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Mr. Van Awesome.
And I'm at Mr. Sheets.
And I tweet for Light Arc Studio.
Speaking of which,
yes,
our game It Stares Back is out
in early access.
And the feedback we've gotten so far has been overwhelmingly positive. So it's really a blessing to see. Please check it out. We'll be adding more content to it as the days pass. We're already planning our next big update.
Yep.
So stay tuned for that.
That's about everything. If you like horror or real-time strategy or high fantasy or science fiction, we cater to all of those things in It Stares Back. So if you're a gamer, check that out. We would really appreciate it. It's only $6 on Steam, $5.99.
And
so
everyone says it's a hell of a deal, so don't listen to us. Listen to everyone who says that.
Yeah.
Which is really gratifying, too, as we spent a lot of time discussing that.
So definitely check that out. Or even if you're not a gamer, if you have friends or loved ones who are, tell them to consider looking at it. We would really appreciate that. That should bring us to the end of this week's episode. Next week, it's the mid-year catch-up.
Whoop, whoop.
We are all so excited for that. And we can't wait to share that with you. Hopefully it will be better and less exasperating than last year's matchup. So until next time, just take a bus. Don't teleport yourself.
Just walk.
Just walk. Just ride your bike.
It's only 15
anything.
feet.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Bye.